Hello and welcome to Farm Journal Live. I'm editor Clinton Griffiths from our newsroom here in northern Indiana as we bring the latest happenings from around the agricultural industry, including what's going on in Washington today. Some pretty big testimony happening out on Capitol Hill. U.S. Trade Ambassador Robert Lighthizer talking trade with China and other countries in testimony before the House Ways and Means Committee. Now Lighthizer says he thinks that China has bought about $10 billion in ag products as of right now, although the latest numbers that we have from April show much less. He also discussed the World Trade Organization and a need for reform. He says he doesn't expect a trade deal with the UK this year, and he has made very little headway with the EU, adding that the U.S. will not compromise on fair access for U.S. agricultural products in negotiations with the EU or Britain. He says no access, no trade deals. We're joined now by John Newton. He's the chief economist with AFBF. John, thanks for joining us on Farm Journal Live. Let's talk about trade. That's been a big topic of conversation over the past 18 months to 2 years. And if we're talking trade, obviously China's a big focus. You've been putting out some charts and some graphs on how we're doing as far as exports to China go and seeing that tracker. How are we doing?
Well, at this point, through the first 4 months of the year, we've exported a little more than $4.3 billion worth of agricultural products to China. We know the calendar year goal is somewhere in the neighborhood of 31 to 32 billion when you take into consideration insurance and freight. So right now, the current pace, if we look at historical trends on how much we normally ship to China by this point, we're about 60% behind where we need to be to reach the phase one target. I know a lot of people in the trade are looking at the fourth quarter of 2020 as our opportunity to really achieve those phase one targets.
You know, I think that's the question we're all asking. Is it possible to catch up? The fact that we're behind, how much of this do you put on a pandemic that happened at the very start of the year? And you know, where do we, how quickly can both economies recover to meet these goals that we set in January?
Well, I think one of the sectors that has really benefited from the phase one agreement, you think about beef. We have 500 new exporters approved for beef. The pork industry is taking advantage of opportunities with respect to African swine fever. So pork exports to China are up over 1,000%. You look at poultry exports to China, they're up sharply. So the livestock and meat products to China are moving. They're moving well. It's the grain, the oil seeds that are still lagging behind what we need them to be in order to reach the phase one goals.
You know, John, you did put out a chart kind of showing where we sit as far as soybean exports go and comparing it to previous years. And as you see that line there in the purple for this year, you see that it's starting to increase. And over the last few weeks, we've had some positive news on that front, but we're still behind some of those previous year levels.
Well, I think everyone's excited about new crop soybean purchases that the Chinese are making. USDA's Foreign Ag Service in their export sales report does include next marketing year, so that new crop sales. And so pulling that together for China, we are starting to see that accelerate. But you're right, it is still below pre-trade war levels. So there's a lot of room to meet the phase one targets. I think, again, everyone's looking at the fourth quarter after soybean harvest as when we could potentially hit that goal.
And I do think it is interesting. We're making some progress there. We want to be positive about it, but yet we still have a long way to go. There's a lot of year left before we can say whether or not we're seeing a real impact in soybeans.
And there's again, we're going to continue to monitor the data. We're only 4 months in. Farm Bureau, we were part of many other organizations that sent a letter in this week highlighting to the president the importance of the phase one agreement to the ag economy, to all sectors of the agricultural economy. So again, we're optimistic and hopeful that we're going to meet those targets.
John, let's talk about some of the other things that we've been tracking. Obviously, whenever this coronavirus outbreak and pandemic began, you put out a chart that showed the impact to our commodities overall. And early on, there were some pretty significant hits. I mean, we're talking in late March, early April. You saw a majority, if not all, commodities taking a significant impact on price from where we started at the beginning of the year. We've since made a few recoveries, although not every sector has.
You're right. Not every sector is recovering. And when we're looking in particular at the lean hog futures, they continue to remain depressed. If you look at where those nearby contracts were in April, hog prices were down more than 40%. Live cattle was down more than 30%. Milk prices were down sharply. And in recent weeks, they have recovered. We're looking at milk prices today that are higher than where they were at the beginning of the year for the July futures contract. June is above $20 per hundredweight. Rice futures they've seen a tremendous amount of volatility. When you think about the amount of open interest and fund money that's rolled into rice, at one point in time, rice futures were up 40%. I think today they're up about 11%. A lot of volatility in rice and other commodities.
I guess as we try to figure out where we sit, do you think we've passed or gotten past the coronavirus impact to these commodities, and now we're just working on what's left with the global economy? Or are we still feeling a weight from the pandemic and fears of a second wave and all of the other, coming out of, the quarantines and the lockdowns? Is that still weighing on prices going forward?
Well, I think it is. When you let's look at the livestock side. Slaughter capacity is back to where it was year ago levels, but we still got a backlog of market ready animals that need to move through the supply chain. Ethanol production is still 20 to 30% below where it was last year. We've moved through some of the ethanol stocks. So I don't think we're on the other side of this at all. I think as states start to reopen, we're going to see some recovery. But I think it's still going to take some time to say that we're behind or past the coronavirus. We were talking with our poultry growers recently, and for those folks, it may be into 2021 before they're back to normal.
John, talk to me a little bit about the corn market, because obviously ethanol has been a big hit, and the challenges of ethanol with the way that we've seen demand just plummet with all of the quarantines and lockdowns. How do you think that plays out for the future for the corn price? Can we see a recovery there? Is there a possibility?
Well, I think we're seeing the ethanol plants come back online, and that's going to be good for corn demand. I think the question right now is looking at the weather. Is there going to be a weather event that develops for the crop that's in the ground? We saw the good to excellent ratings were reduced slightly this week, so folks are focusing on the weather. And then let's actually see how many acres we planted. That June 30 acreage report will give us a good indication of what kind of supply we could potentially have. We'll start to monitor the yield, and I think taking the supply and demand into consideration, we'll be able to start to crystallize price expectations for corn next year.
As we talk about farm income, that was another chart that you put out here recently, looking at overall farm income and comparing how much of that farm income may come from some government payments, as we talk about the CFAP program and some of the other things from the Farm Bill that may be out there. Talk us through this chart and what we expect for this year and possibly next year.
Well, I think this information was released by University of Missouri's FACRI a few weeks ago that showed that even with the government support we're likely to receive this year, farm income's going to be down in 2020, and then it's going to be even more challenging in 2021. Even though crop and livestock receipts are likely to improve in 2021, the dramatic drop off in support from trade assistance or coronavirus assistance packages mean it's still going to be a pretty challenging year in 2021. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that's why people are so focused on the phase one deal with China. They're focused on USMCA, the U.S.-Japan trade agreement, and overall starting to see the global economy start to recover, because that's going to go a long way to driving demand for U.S. agricultural products.
Do we get any sense that we're in some sort of new plateau, or what the cycle is going to look like? We look back to, obviously 11, 12, 13, 14. Those were pretty big years for the overall ag economy. Where do we look as far as we start projecting out here in the next few years for ag?
Well, that's a challenging question. When you think about what got us to 11, 12, and 13, we had strong global economies. Global GDP growth was very strong. Exports were very strong. We had several short crops here in the United States. The drought in 2012 pushed prices higher. And then, the challenging thing is, when there's a market rent to be captured, when prices are high, you're going to incentivize people to expand production. You saw milk production expand in Europe. We all know what's happened in South America in terms of their soybean production and second crop corn production. So it's a more competitive environment today than what it was, a decade ago when we started to see commodity prices rise to what would ultimately be their record high. That can happen again. I think with everything's got to line up. We need to continue to watch supplies. And more importantly for growers, it's about making marketing decisions. You need to know where to market your crop, proactively manage your risk. And I think that's the most important thing to do.
John, I've been asking everybody this, given kind of everything that's been going on over the last couple of months. Give me one thing that you're optimistic about going forward here in 2020 into 2021. It's a big question. It's a tough one, right?
We were pretty optimistic at the beginning of the year with all the trade agreements that we had in place. Folks started to feel like they were rounding third and headed into home. What people need more than anything is just to know with certainty what our markets are, where we're going to do business, and then we can go out and make the right business decisions. And that's what we need. We've been hit with black swan after black swan for the last 3 years. It's been very difficult to plan for this uncertainty. What we need is just to start to crystallize what our markets are going to be, where we're going to do business, and let us go out and do that business.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, appreciate the insights, John, as always. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Journal Live. Lots to talk about here as we get through the rest of this year and into the growing season. So we'll be keeping an eye and hopefully check back in with you here soon.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to all of you for joining us for Farm Journal Live today. Of course, if you'd like to keep up with the very latest happening in the agricultural industry, you can do so by going to agweb.com, or make sure you check out some of our other properties at farmreport.com and agday.com. Again, we appreciate you joining us. We hope everybody out in farm country has a great afternoon. Have a good day. It started as social distancing, self-isolation, and caring for loved ones. A time for agriculture to be proud, to be essential. Now, it's changing. While states start to reopen and jobs resume, out here, the clouds are building. The path is uncertain. It's not the first time, it won't be the last. But we'll farm on. This soil is soaked in generations of sweat, of reinvention, of grit. Farm on is a calling. It's a mantra, a mindset. When the horizon dims and things turn dark, we'll find the light. We may be doing this for you, but we're also doing it for them. 2020, now's the time to farm on.